Started. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. It looks like we've got some great people on today, and so we'll do a quick housekeeping things before we get started. There will be a recording that will be sent out at the end of the webinar today after it's downloaded. And we'll be sending out the resources that we're discussing also. I'm going to throw into the chat really quickly a link to download the slides for today. And when the webinar is up, it will also be on there. So feel free to download those if you'd like to follow along. If not, check them out later. And when if you want to refer back, come rewatch the webinar. It'll be at this link, but I'll send that all out to you guys. Thank you guys all so much for the awesome questions that you gave when you were signing up for the webinar. I actually responded to a few of them already, and we are going to be reserving a time for all the Q&As at the end of the session today. So stay tuned for that. It will be about an hour long, the whole presentation. So let's get started. We are talking all about website maintenance today. So hopefully by the end of the next about 45 minutes or so, you'll have a pretty great understanding of what your website needs on an ongoing basis, how you can tackle it yourself, and what resources you need to know when selecting a website maintenance plan. So quick background into who we are. We are coming to you from Elevation. We are a full-service web design agency that is dedicated to empowering nonprofits with the solutions they need to make an even greater impact in our largely tech-dominated world. So we started as a custom web design agency about 15 years ago and have since expanded to offer graphic design and branding services, ongoing support packages, which is what we're talking about today, SEO and Google Ad Grant Management, custom email marketing campaigns, so much more. But if you want to learn more about us and who we are, you can go to elevationweb.org and check us out. Who are we? Hi, my name is Sarah Henry, and I am the Content Marketing and Growth Manager here at Elevation Web. I'll be giving the bulk of today's presentation, and today we are also here joined by Jenna, also from Elevation.
Hey everyone, so I'm the Technical Support Manager at Elevation, so I'll be looking at like some of your more technical questions as they come in, just in terms of different things that we'll be seeing later on, and yeah, I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
We're so excited that Jenna is here today. She will be manning our chat. So if you have questions about things as they come, she'll be chiming in either by writing back to you in the chat box or chiming in to answer your questions live. So look out for her. So let's jump into the content. So today we are going to be talking about a few different things, but a quick overview. We're going to start with why do you really need to constantly maintain your website? What does website maintenance really consist of? We'll go through a simple schedule for you to keep your website maintained, and then we're going to talk about website accessibility, which is something that has become very popular recently as people are realizing how necessary it is. So let's get started. So why do we really need website maintenance? Website maintenance is website insurance. We all think we don't really need it until one day our radiator breaks in our car or someone scrapes our car in a parking lot. It's always that accidental thing that you never really realized was possible of happening until it happens. So your website's of course not your car. So here are a few common stories we hear from our clients when they come saying, we need your help. The story where the donation form crashes the day before your event. So the worst accidents always seem to come at the worst possible time, like right before something really important. And having a website maintenance team will always help because these things can happen from plugins being malfunctioning or updates going wrong or someone clicks something that messes up something. So it's always good to have another set of eyes watching your site. Then we have the one where an injected code turns all of your photos not safe for work. This one is, of course, a horrible one, and it happens more than you would hope. This is why it's so important to keep your websites updated and your WordPress updated. However, you want to take care before you update, because there's always the one where an intern updates a plugin and your site becomes the white screen of death. Or maybe they updated a plugin or they added a new plugin without checking with the developer. WordPress and other platforms are very simple and very user-friendly until all of a sudden it's not. And there are many ways to cause many different types of screw-ups, which is why it's always important to check with your web developer before updating anything, and we'll go into this into much more detail throughout the presentation. So website maintenance is far more than just for worst case scenario situations. It's also a way to stay organized and keep your website happy and running smoothly and quickly. So without constantly maintaining your website, we often find sites that are called the Frankenstein site. So right now, WordPress, there are over 50,000 plugins, which have been downloaded over 1.25 billion times. So there is so much that WordPress offers, which is both a blessing and a curse. Oftentimes, we'll get clients who have been creating their own site on WordPress with all of the plugins in the world while not doing the necessary research into what these plugins actually consist of. So they're really exciting when you see all of your different options, and you'll stack plugin on top of plugin on top of plugin until you just have this monster of a website. And then it's just way too much to handle. So going back and going through then becomes pretty difficult. So this clip here does a pretty good job of showing what a Frankenstein site can look like when you're not watching for your updates. Having this amount of plugins that are not updated properly, they can conflict with each other, they can cause other problems, and many of them might not even be used anymore. So all of this can just wreak absolute havoc on your site, whether it be messing with functionality or site speed. You don't want to let your plugins look like this. A few things you can do to look out so you don't have a site that looks like this. Oops. When you're upgrading, these days WordPress will often automatically updates for you. And while this is good for security purposes, this is a nightmare for your plugins. So think of it this way. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have a smartphone, either an Android or an iPhone. When upgrading your phone to a new operating system or iOS, sometimes your apps stored on that phone will lose functionality and some things get messed up and don't work properly. So you have to go in and upgrade your plugins the same way as you have to upgrade your apps to make sure that they are working in harmony with the current upgrade that you're on for your actual CMS. Sometimes this can take some time, and there's a period of time when your upgrades are out of sync. So you want to be careful and check on your plugin functionality often and make sure that you're not missing anything. So another thing that happens when you're not careful with your plugins is your site speed. Many plugins are professionally built that won't cause many problems, but there are also many out there that have really poorly built codes and that actually will be slowing your site down. So you want to check out all of your plugins. Are there any that you're not using that are still installed? Are there any that you downloaded and it turns out you don't actually need them? Or they didn't do what you thought that they were going to do? So many people will forget to uninstall these from your site. So it's important to go back and make sure to do this. Also, not all of your plugins are going to get along. With over 50,000 plugins available and 50,000 different developers, Well, I'm sure there's some crossover, but it's not a surprise that some of your plugins weren't tested for cohesion against all of the other possible plugins. So some of these aren't going to blend together properly, and the code will counteract each other. And it's not always obvious until you realize that some of the users aren't able to use a previous functionality or something has gone wrong in the actual site. So we always suggest checking with a developer before adding in new plugins, just to make sure that your code won't be interfering. Besides this, Frankenstein sites can simply cause confusion. There's too much going on and a lot can slip through the cracks. So to avoid the Frankenstein monster, what you want to do is make sure to check the reputation of your plugins before you install those plugins. This looks like previous ratings and comments. Google it to see what people have written about it. If there's any horror stories about it, take those into account before hitting install. Before you download it, make sure it has been updated to the most current version of WordPress. WordPress gets lots of updates all of the time, and people who just create a plugin and don't ever check on it won't be updating it to work with the new version. So make sure that it has been updated and has a history of updates as well. You also want to check in with your web developer. It's always good to confirm with someone who you trust, who knows the ins and outs of your code and your full website, and they'll be able to tell if something is going to go wrong or warn you if you need to fix it or something's going to break.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in here really quick and respond to your question, Trudy. So offhand, I don't have like specific examples to give you for like maybe some popular plugins that are known to be conflicting, but I do have like one example for you in which case like having the web developer on hand to answer that question can be really useful. Now that WordPress has like released Gutenberg, which is a block editor, some older sites that have like extremely custom templates for like their donations or other things like that don't interact well with the block editor or other kinds of block editors. I can't remember the one that I just did some research on, I think last week. But basically we went in and like looked at their templates and some of the customized parts of their sites, and if we're not sure and we can't tell right away, also sometimes what we'll do is check it against if you have like a really, really big site, sometimes your web developer or our team, what we do is like we'll create a copy of your website and test out the plugin to see if your other functionality gets affected.
All right, great. So hope that answers your question. And so let's move on here. So what is website maintenance? Beyond all of these provisionary measures, what actually goes into the constant maintenance of your website? So there are two parts to website maintenance, parts that you're gonna wanna do yourself and parts that you need someone with advanced technical knowledge to do. So think of your website like your car. You put gas in it, you wash it, you add more wiper fluid. These are things that you have to do to make sure that it can drive from point A to point B. But from time to time, you need to tune it. You need to tune it up by someone who actually knows what's going on under the hood. So similar to taking your car to the mechanic every 3,000 miles, website maintenance can be done by a hired firm. Hiring someone on staff with this necessary technical knowledge is a really big financial burden for most nonprofits, and they won't have the available resources to do it themselves. So oftentimes it's cheaper to have a trustworthy ongoing support team who can perform these tune-ups monthly. So you want your team to build a relationship with your website, and if you go with a full service team, they'll also be a resource when it's time for your next redesign or your next big event. So there are a few components you will need to coordinate with your website maintenance support team, and these can get a little bit complicated. So it's important that you understand what these consist of, so you know you're getting everything you need out of your team. So we're gonna run through these really quickly, and then we're gonna go into what you need to be doing on a more like weekly, monthly basis. So the first thing that I keep mentioning, because it's honestly the biggest headache for so many people, is your WordPress and plugin updates. These updates are coming with bug fixes and security improvements, so they're always necessary. We always recommend having this checked on by a professional with more advanced technical knowledge who will understand your site and its code, because they can catch all these hiccups before they actually happen. So, however, if you do decide to update them yourself, these are a few things you should know. Note that you should always have your website backed up before you click update. Just in case the update contains some coding errors, always be safe and have a backup version of your website in store ready to go, just in case. If, for instance, a handful of your plugins need updating, instead of trying to update them all together, go through them one at a time and check on your website functionality afterwards. So if by chance something does go wrong, by updating your plugins individually, you can clearly identify a faulty plugin and fix it accordingly. You're also going to want to update your plugins during off-peak times. So at the off chance that a plugin causes an issue to your website, the last thing you want to do is have it affect one user's experience, let alone that of many. So by strategically planning when to update your plugins during a low traffic time, you can minimize this potential damage while also protecting users from your website malfunctions. Hosting needs. So your hosting provider is like the garage for your car, the place where your website lives. It's the safe place to keep your most important item. The deeper you dive into the web, however, the more confusing it can be. So sometimes problems are going to arise that require very specific technical knowledge or terminology that's hard for someone without an extensive technological background to really understand and solve. So if you don't have it in the budget to hire someone on staff, make sure that your support team is proficient in your specific hosting provider. So we specialize in WordPress. We use WP Engine to host. So make sure that your hosting provider is, or your support team is very well in the know of your hosting provider.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in here and answer a question from Dee. So one of the things that I would suggest is really getting a look at how much time your staff is spending in terms of making sure they're trained on how to properly use your site, or checking to see how much time you're spending on doing updates and maintenance, and see whether or not really that's a good use of time for the company. Because if somebody on your team is spending a lot of time doing this, and maybe that's not the role they're supposed to fill, it actually might be a smarter decision to get a maintenance budget. And if you're instead of, it is kind of similar to a car mechanic in the way that most development teams work with labor hours. So basically they're charging you for their time, whether it be to answer questions or to do guides or to make updates, which is probably why they're sort of charging you one-on-one hours or 1-for-1 hours, depending on what they're doing. So I would say get a look at how much that cost is, how often you write in, how much you're spending on it versus what an ongoing maintenance plan would be like, with regular updates and maybe service hours or labor hours included.
Great. All right. And someone wrote in and said, if we could repeat the question for answer. So this question was that the web development team wants to charge us whenever we contact them. Not sure if I can afford to ask them about every single tweak, other options. So that was the response for that question. All right. Moving on to style adjustments and restructuring. So your website is going to be a reflection of your organization, which is ever changing. So with new updates, new ventures, new projects, new events, come new things that you never really thought you would need when you originally designed your site. This could be a new CRM tool that you've integrated when your Excel spreadsheet just is too much to keep track of it all anymore. Or maybe you're doing a full rebrand with brand new logos. Some things here are going to be more easy to do on your own, while others are going to take more effort. So the more technical it is, the more likely you're going to make a mistake. So don't be afraid to reach out to your support team if things are too complicated, and have them check your work once it's all in. Site backups. So this term is thrown around on every website maintenance site ever. But what is it and how exactly do you do it? Well, it kind of depends. So your backup is the exact copy of your website. And so in the case of mishaps or crashes, the backup is there ready to be launched with all of your information before the site actually crashed. So it's up and ready in no time. How often you back up your website will depend on a few things. How often you update your site in general is the biggest one, because before you update any piece of content, make sure that you have a backup. You should also update more often if you're regularly receiving form submissions or if it's a very large touch point for your organization. So make sure you're doing this at least once a week though. No matter if you're using it all the time or kind of letting it be, you should be having more things at least every week. So make sure you're doing a backup at least once a week. So you're going to do this through your hosting provider. It's a little bit different for every provider. So you're going to want to check with them to see if they require a manual request or if it's automatically done. This all depends on your provider and your account level. So you need to check with them for all of the details, but make sure you go check it. Another thing that your support staff and team is going to help with is these incidentals, which are the little things that always slip your mind when you're planning out long-term maintenance. Going back to the example for your car, you go to your mechanic for regular checkups to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. It's going to be the same way. So these regular oil changes, checking the engine, making sure nothing's going on to cause future damage. It's going to be the same thing with your site. So you're going to want to have these regular checkups with technical professionals, which will keep big problems from happening before they actually occur. So these are usually all the things we never would have thought about. But when we haven't had a checkup in a few years, you're really surprised to find what you can find buried in your code. So this one's a little bit less to do with your website in specifics, but if you're working with a full service firm, some like us here at Elevation, we will actually allow you to use some of your support hours to design new materials, assets, and graphics for any upcoming events and campaigns. So as you all know, it's super important to always keep your branding consistent, and who better to help but someone who really knows your nonprofit brand. So if you're working with a full service support team, then they're already familiar with your brand and your site, and they can create cohesive and new assets for whatever you need and whatever you need next using your support hours. So it's nice to have some leeway there if you're getting a full support team. All right, so what about you? So these were all things that you need from a support team. So someone who's trained with advanced technical knowledge. And while you'll want to be checking in with them every month, that's only one part of your website maintenance schedule. So we created a handy schedule for you all on everything you need to do and when, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. So we suggest add a recurring calendar event. So choose a time every week, every month, every quarter, and every year, and add your calendar invites to everyone on the team. So we actually created a handy infographic with all this information that we'll be sending out after the webinar. So bookmark that, link it to your calendar invites, and go through the steps one by one with every meeting just to make sure that nothing is going to be missed. So what does this look like? You don't want your website maintenance to take up too much of your time. You're super busy doing other really important work, and doing this content maintenance is kind of a bore sometimes. However, it must be done. So once a week, you're going to want to get your team together and sit down and just go through all the basics. Do a quick run through, ensure all of your pages are loading properly and quickly. Just run through your site, check your different pages, click on all your different links and see what's coming up. If you find any broken links or 404 errors, either fix them yourself or reach out to your website maintenance team, and they will fix any of your broken links and redirect any of your 404 errors. You're going to want to, every week, update your content. So your upcoming event calendar or post your weekly blogs, all of these count. So your nonprofit is constantly doing things. You have lots of events. If you have lots of events, you're going to want to update your calendar, update your featured events section on your homepage if you have one, or post about your past events. A weekly blog article is great content to continuously post, as search engines like to see the new content and information showing up on your site. It shows that you're alive and active and worthy of being seen to the world. Google loves it. So write about your event, updates from your organizations or educational pieces about for the public about your services. All things that are good to post. You're also going to want to respond to user suggestions and feedback. See what they suggest and take these advice into consideration, because your users are the ones actually consuming your website. So if they've reached out, it was important enough for them to notice it and say this needs to be fixed. So any bugs that they mention or things that are going wrong, make sure to address those. Delete any spam comments and form submissions just to clean some things up. Also check all of your new content that you've posted in the last week for responsiveness on your different browsers, and do a quick run through on all the popular browsers, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and check on your mobile also. So that can just be your team opening up your computers and website and tablets and mobile phones and checking your sites just to make sure that they look all right. If you're updating your website often, make sure to have a backup of your site before doing any of these changes. So always, always, always do a backup. Every month, it's going to be every month, every quarter, and every year, things get a little bit more complicated. So every month, you're going to want to update your plugins and content management system. So while your CMS may update automatically now, which is great for security purposes, you have to manually update those plugins properly. And it's crucial to your website because these are necessary precautions that could be entirely not following them could be counterproductive. So make sure that you are updating them and talk to a technical professional before making any of these updates. So once a month, you are going to be checking in with your technical maintenance team. So have them go through this as well, updating your plugins in CMS. Check all of your contact information. Things change often. Maybe new people get hired, people are leaving, going in and out. So any changed business addresses, phone numbers, or emails, make sure all of the users are informed on your website. Check in with your staff monthly and on their contact information and adjust it accordingly. It's very simple. Check on your loading speed and make sure that it's under 3 seconds. If you've added anything or changed anything around, it can slow your site down. If it's not under 3 seconds, let your technical professional know immediately. We all know in this day and age that users have a very short attention span, and 3 seconds is about the average that anyone will wait for a website to load. So if it takes more than 3 seconds, you are losing money, you are losing donations and visitors, and overall, good to get that checked. You also want to check and verify that all of your new pages that you posted will comply with accessibility guidelines, which we're going to go into more at the end. And then Every month, test and confirm that your donation page is properly accepting your donations. So this is really pivotal, of course, if you're a nonprofit accepting these donations. So run through all the steps on an outside browser. Make sure that you're collecting all the correct information and the data is being processed and stored properly. Always good to check. Also check in with your technical maintenance team for a thorough run through. Like I mentioned before, this will include updating your plugins in CMS. It will also include all of the things that we mentioned in the last section. You're also going to want to review any of your A/B tested web pages. If you're doing any A/B testing, if you know what that is, it's comparing two different types of content or images to see what gets the best results. Review those and then decide which way to go, either A or B, and get those web pages back in action. By the quarter, so this will be 4 times a year, so you're going to check for a little bit more. You're going to analyze the overall site content and confirm this new content is cohesive with your older content. So you want to make sure that your new content is up to the level of quality needed on your site. And does it work with the old content? So check on your graphics and photos and make sure that they look like they fit together. Sometimes we have really quick fixes that work in the moment when we're stressed for time and we need to get something up, but when we look back, it doesn't look good. So make sure to readjust those, and your site should be progressing every quarter. Also review your internal strategy. What is the plugins that are making up your website? Discard the old plugins that you're no longer using or serve a purpose. So clean out the things that you keep saying that you'll get to, but just never do. And go kind of deeper into your website strategy of what are these plugins being used for? Should we be shifting this strategy? Are there ways that we can speed up our life in our site with our plugins? And take a look and see what you can get rid of. So like I said before, confirm your graphics and photos are up to date and level of quality. And then also check your full site for responsiveness on all different browsers, mobile and desktop. This will take some manual labor, checking all of these links and images for your external links, just to make sure they're running smoothly and directing people to the right places. In doing so, you're going to provide the honesty of your company resources and boost both of your site engine rankings and your website speed. So yes.
I'm going to jump in on 2 points here. A couple of things that we do suggest is whenever you are getting rid of old plugins, I suggest that you deactivate them first and then check any of the areas where they'd like them used. For example, if it's a gallery plugin, you would want to check in your media pages and things like that to make sure that they aren't doing anything else and that nothing else breaks before you actually delete them off of your site. And also, so in general, just to give you an idea of what kind of hours you'd be looking at, depending on the size of your site, I know it takes our QA team sometimes up to 8 hours to check on a bigger site across, all of the major browsers in mobile and in desktop, just so you have kind of an idea of what kind of hours you should be allocating for something like that.
Great, yes, all good points. All right. And so now by the year, every year, you're going to want to get your team together and do one big, massive website run through. So the first thing you want to do is check on your permanent content and adjust it for this upcoming year. Go through your site and see what you learn. Put yourself in the mindset of a new visitor. Your site is full of permanent copy and content that you're often looking at every day and you're not analyzing. So you're going to want to check all of it. So a lot of times things we write in the moment don't sound so great when we look back at them and we're more separated from them. So you're going to want to check your photos, need upgrading, make sure that your content is accurate and up to date with your other marketing strategies. Does something that was previously written sound wrong? Should you be updating your vision statement or about us page? Check your menu also. Does it need to be changed? Are people finding what they came here to find? Are all their expectations being met? So these are all questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. You're also going to want to renew your website domain name and CMS subscription and your hosting provider every year. And for this, keep your payment and username, email, and password information in a very safe place, especially if your website keeps changing hands for who is in charge. Like if someone new is taking it on every year, that is really difficult to pass along. So make sure you keep it in a safe place and don't let that get lost. You're also going to want to update the copyright date on the bottom of the website footer. It's a simple fix, but always good to do at the new year. And lastly, last two things, you're going to want to set goals for the new year, adjust your website strategy to align with these goals. So maybe you hire new employees with new ideas that you want expressed on your new site, and maybe it's time for a full redesign. Sometimes it's just time for a fresh look. If your support team is a full service firm, you can reach out to them and start planning your new project. And if they're a credible firm, it's always best to stick with those who know your website inside and out. So if you can stick with them, stick with them. Just reflect on how your website served you in the last year and see what's the next step and where can you keep moving forward. All right. So the last little bit that I'm going to touch on is website accessibility. It's so easy for organizations to forget about this. Especially if you're not serving that direct population. However, making your website accessible for all types of users, including those with poor vision, different cognitive and physical abilities, and different technical abilities is very important because the internet is a place of freedom of information. And when it only applies to people who have full access to all of this, then it's not fully free. So make sure that you're in compliance with these few standards. I'm going to go through a few of them that you can update. Oops. All right. So you're going to want to start with the text. Using a size 16 is a really great place to start for those with bad vision. Also, you're going to want to try to zoom in your monitor screen on a Mac. You're going to want to click Command, Shift, and the plus key to see what it looks like when you zoom into a larger font and try navigating with that. You might find that some of your buttons and some things get cut off or don't work as well. So make sure that those all work properly. You're also going to want to include alt text, and that's alternative text on all of your non-text content. So this means that you should write a short description of all of your images, GIFs, banners, compressed files that can't be read out loud by someone who's not looking at your site, but who's listening to your website. So you want to make sure that those people are understanding everything that's happening as well. For your videos, always include closed captions. There are tons of guides online as to how to add transcripts to your YouTube videos, or you can simply add the text on all of your social sharing. That can be done by inputting the text into the editing software and exporting it with it overlaid. Not only does this help those who are hard of hearing, but it's a win-win for people who are consuming the content in public without the ability to listen, don't have headphones in a busy place, all types. Lastly, for text, you're going to want to use your text descriptive links. This means that when you are creating backlinks to your content, don't just use click here and keep it that way. You want to include information as to where the link is going in a description of the web page that the link is sending you, either in the link or right before the link, or include an icon and add text to the link that describes the next page. So this little bit of extra context helps those who have motion impairment, people who can then skip these links and they don't want to see what that might be going to. It can also help those with cognitive limitations because it's easy to become disoriented by too many means of navigation. And people with visual disabilities can actually determine if they want to click on that based on the context around it and not by having to check on what's on the next page. So it just gives people a heads up before they're joining on. To assist those who are colorblind or visually impaired or even epileptic, you're going to want to check the color schemes of your website. There's a few different softwares, and we can talk about those more in a second, but you're going to want to check your color contrast. So according to the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the contrast ratio for text and images is going to be at least 4 to 5. So for larger text, however, the contrast should be at least 3 to 1. Branding experts can assist you in creating a guide that looks like the one on the screen here. However, there are also WordPress plugins and different things that can show you how your contrast is looking on your site. So feel free to do some research. You can also see on the box, so what it shows you is it compares the background to the text color. So the ratings then display how easy it is to read. The AA and AAA ratings are going to be the best, whereas the DNP should not be used. So if you can see that on the top row is what the text looks like, and on each row going down is what the background looks like, and it's comparing your different color schemes of your different brand colors to show what can and can be used. Also, the color of any content should not be the only indication of meaning. For example, you can highlight in yellow or bolden in red text for emphasis. However, you need to have that extra step of the highlight or the bold or the italices or the underline. Don't just have a piece of text in yellow or in red. So that way those with sight issues can still understand that there is a link there. All right, to best reach groups in areas with old age, web designers should make navigation as seamless as possible. For example, if there is an error of some sort, the errors message should be put and fully explained in text. So if errors are only communicated through a little singular mode, like a warning icon, many demographics will stay confused as to why that error occurred and don't know how to resolve it. So make sure you're especially clear on why that error came about. You're also going to want to allow users to navigate the website via the keyboard through tab navigation. This way, those with or without mouse pads can travel through the website easily. And for our websites, we love to use the WordPress plugin from userway.org. This creates a button on the side of the website with links to all types of accessible navigation features. Lastly, if your website has any time limits, like membership login resets or things like that, make sure that the time limit is flexible or is long enough to be accommodating. So otherwise, users with slow internet, any mental or physical differences, or older age, people cannot be accommodated properly. One way to maintain these time limits is just to insert time warnings so people can remain alert and make sure that they're not ridiculously fast. All right, one last thing is we have a few links for you guys. Userway, as we mentioned before, is great for accessible navigation. If you want to take a screenshot of this, that might be helpful, so then you can go and look through these afterwards. The second one, Wave, is a website accessibility evaluation tool to evaluate any website. Google Lighthouse also runs accessibility and scans any website. And then you can explore all of the WordPress accessibility tools, alt text finders, anything your website needs, and many other options. So feel free to explore all that exists on there. So that is all the information that we have for you today. And we're going to jump into the Q&A section. So if Jenna wants to jump in here, go ahead.
All right, so if you guys have a couple other questions, you can send them in through the chat now. And if not, I can go through some of the questions that we received. And I'll go over a couple of those answers with you guys today. Okay, so I'm going to go over a couple of the questions that were sent in here. So some of the questions that we got in that I thought would apply probably to a lot of our users today are, here's one that I liked a lot, which was, how can I make website maintenance easier so it just kind of routinely happens and it's not a whole lot to do each time? What should I be doing myself versus having a developer do? So I would say, and like this is something that you, depending on your like CRM, you can add in a plugin to do backups. And there's a ton of different ones. Like I use WP Engine all-in-one for like regular backups. You can do some that are scheduled out. I do suggest that you talk to your hosting provider about those first, because depending on how much space you have in your hosting, doing a bunch of like regular scheduled backups can also really like add up. So make sure that there's also some kind of like auto delete and that there's going to be space in your hosting server for that. I've worked with sites before where the functions started doing like really strange things, like cutting things out, and some things weren't working correctly, and it's because they had actually run out of space on their hosting website every time they did a backup of their site, which was huge. So the things that like you can do are a lot of the things that somebody who maybe is a little bit less technical can do, are things that like Sarah had gone over today about like updating your plugins. Usually when you click on a plugin, whenever you like go into your updating, like update space, it'll let you know whether or not it's compatible with your version of, for what I work with WordPress. So it will tell you like it's compatible up to this version of WordPress. Some things that you should have a developer do is updating your PHP version. So that's something your host provider can sometimes do, or your developer do. Usually it takes like an hour, maybe two, depending on what version you have. And these kind of things are very important to do, because if you don't keep your WordPress up to date or your plugins up to date, that's a way for a lot of it's a way for people to like get into your site. So a lot of these updates come with security fixes. So it is important to keep everything as up to date as possible. It will happen, like, I mean, at least once a month or every 2 months, somebody will write in who doesn't have a support plan and be like, oh, my site was hacked, or, oh, these like inappropriate things are showing up when I Google my site. And that can often happen like through an old version of anything from your PHP to outdated plugins. So it's important to do those things, and hopefully that kind of like runs over some things that you can do versus a developer. And like in general, you can definitely keep your content up to date, things like that.
Right, and we have another question. Someone asked, what are the accessibility features that are necessary by law versus those that are just the right things to do? So this is a good question, because this is coming up a lot recently. Interestingly enough, right now in the United States, apart from maybe local and government websites and regulations, which are required to meet specific regulations, right now there are not any enforceable ADA legal standards for website accessibility. Hearing that, it's easy to be like, cool, I just won't update my website. That is not the case, however, because there have been numerous cases and of websites being sued for not having their websites accessible. So this is something that's actively changing. So it's good to get on the right side of it right now and follow any of the standards from the the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So feel free to Google those and follow all of those and make sure that you're doing this correctly. So watch out for that.
Okay, and so here's another question from Dawn. What about CMS upgrades? Other than making a backup in advance, are there any other things to consider to avoid pitfalls? So this is for CMS version upgrades. Yeah, so there's a couple things you can do, especially like taking into consideration the age of your site. So you want to check your PHP version. You can Google the upgrades. So for example, whenever the version 5s of like the WordPress update came out, we actually updated a lot of our sites slowly after there had been like maybe 1 or like 2 more iterations, just because from all of the reviews we read, there was like a lot of bugs that needed to be worked out and issues with plugins and all kinds of things. So we in general didn't upgrade some of our sites on purpose, just to make sure that that version was running smoothly. It's similar to, like Sarah mentioned before, a phone update, like your iOS software or whatever. So once it comes out and once it's released, you don't have to upgrade right away. I would like check reviews and make sure everything's fine. Usually the iterations in between the major versions tend to be a little less bumpy, but usually when there's like a full version upgrade, like from a 4 to a 5, like so speaking in WordPress, for example, there's going to be a lot of changes in how it's functioning and how it interacts with plugins and things like that. And a lot of smaller, like lesser known plugins may not have been updated. Their developers might not have had enough time to update them, things like that. So there's also like a consideration of time.
Great, yes. And we have another question from Sonia. Do you have a site for reference about the user accessibility suggestions that are being made? If you go to abta.org, it's the American Brain Tumor Association, you can see that user way navigation in play. They have a button on the right with a handicap sign, and when you click on that, it has abilities to create a full website, accessible website. It also have, which I love, different languages for all different people, which is really important for sharing with different people of different backgrounds, of course. So I'll throw that into the chat, abta.org. And yes, we will be doing future webinars we're planning out a full webinar on website accessibility to go through all of it. So stay on our email list and we will reach out and let you all know when that happens.
So we only have a couple of minutes left here, so I'm going to read over a couple of questions and answer them as quickly as possible. So one question we got was a general question about like how to fit maintenance into your schedule when you wear multiple hats at a small nonprofit. So this is something that like we specialize at Elevation Web, we specialize in nonprofit, so I'm very familiar with this. One of the things I would say is to do it in small batches. So the guidelines that Sarah gave, I think are really great in terms of just setting aside a little bit of time, because otherwise if you end up with like 25 plugins that need updated, it's going to take you well over half an hour, maybe up to an hour. So just trying to do like small spots of keeping things up to date, or even like one of the things that we do is like we'll pick, depending on the size of your site, like we'll pick maybe a certain thing in a menu, and we'll like encourage the people who have maintenance plans with us to like go over the content of like these 3 items under this one drop down and just scan through them. So just kind of taking things piecemeal and not getting overwhelmed or trying to do it all at once is a way that you can address that. Another question is, we most often update when we hear from donors that something is out of date. So this is an important one. I would say that like when you get a schedule in place, that'll definitely help you to get a more thorough check across your site. And once you get into like a pattern of it, or once you've completed it and you're sort of starting over, you'll be a bit faster at spotting things, knowing what to look for. And then always, like Sarah said, regularly testing your donation. Just like make a $1 donation, test it, walk through the steps, make sure there's no areas where you're getting caught, and then checking in whatever your system is, like Stripe or Authorize.net or PayPal, and making sure that that was registered correctly is a really important one. And that can be something that you can do like pretty quickly. So just maybe like throwing something little on your calendar, blocking out that 15-minute time period and just catching it sort of helps you feel like you're catching up and doing things proactively. Another question is, what platforms lend themselves to easy updating? We don't have anyone on staff that knows how to use WordPress, which is what's currently being used. So it depends on what kind of time your staff has. If you guys decide to keep it more in-house, I would definitely suggest getting your staff trained on how to make regular updates. We offer trainings at Elevation that are more customized to your site or to your WordPress site, but there's also a ton of really great free tutorials online. They're not going to be exact to your site, but they'll give you general ideas of how to update things. So it sort of depends on your staff, but I would definitely strongly encourage getting your staff trained up on regular content updates, things like that, for your WordPress site. And then in terms of this, like, lends nicely into the next question we had about, like, what's the best way to learn more about website maintenance. I would say it depends on how much time you have, because going through like online tutorials, some of them are really great, some of them are really terrible. So I suggest, depending on your level of comfort, maybe like WordPress for beginners. There's like some really great content on there that, like I said, it's not going to be exact to your site, but there's a lot of guides out there. So whatever your CMS is, they likely have trainings and what's called documentation on the actual site. So you can actually go on to like WordPress.com and look and see what kind of resources they're offering for basic tutorials, maybe some things that are a little more complicated. And the websites of the plugins themselves often also have a lot of information in their forums and in their what's called documentation, which is just people going in and asking questions and other people helping them solve it. So that's where I would start, or I would see if your web developer offers training on your website.
All right, and it looks like we have one more question before we sign off, and we'll keep this as our last one. So if the Gutenberg editor doesn't work on my WP theme, would you recommend moving to a new theme? Reverted to the old editor version, and I'm wondering if this may be a conflict down the line with future updates. What do you think, Jenna?
Yeah, the classic editor plugin we're using it on a lot of our sites right now because our clients are saying that they don't really at the moment have time to train a lot of their employees on the new editor because it is very different. So eventually, yes, it'll probably cause conflicts further down the line with future updates. At the moment, it seems to be fine, and I'm assuming probably for at least another 6 to 8 months, it's going to be fine. But you do want to keep things as updated as possible. So I would look into getting a new theme. I would also look and see, sort of like how much work is that going to be? Do you have the time and budget to do it? So there's a lot of things at play, but your website is live, so everything is going to be constantly updating, and it's better to move forward than backward.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to Jenna for joining us today. And also a huge thank you to all of you guys for joining in and listening to us. We worked really hard on this, so we're excited to have you all listening in. It was great to be here and to chat with you and to answer all of your questions. We love hearing from you guys and hearing about what all of you guys are up to. We will be sending out a link to the recording, so watch out for that in a few hours. And also the link for the slides is up on the chat already, and we'll be sending out that as well. Also a survey, if you would like to give us some feedback about how we did today, it'd be great to hear. But thank you guys all so much for joining us. It was such a blast, and we hope to see you next time.
All right, thanks guys.